They mocked her worn clothes and cheap water bottle. They whispered she didn't belong in first class. Just another broke passenger in seat 11F. Then the F-22 pilots walked past her. One stopped. Stared. And suddenly stood at attention. Her call sign changed everything. She wasn't nobody. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The airplane cabin hummed with the usual pre-flight energy. Business travelers tapped on laptops, families settled children into seats, and flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency. In seat 11F, by the window, sat a woman who looked like she belonged anywhere but first class. Her name was Sarah Chen, though nobody on the plane knew that yet. She wore a faded navy hoodie, the kind you could pick up at any surplus store for $15. Her jeans had a small tear at the knee, not the fashionable kind, just worn through from use. A backpack sat at her feet, stuffed full but carefully organized. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry except a simple watch with a cracked face. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from long flights and longer days. The man in seat 11E, a businessman named Marcus Wellington, glanced at her with barely hidden disgust. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His watch definitely did. "Excuse me," he said, not really asking. "I think you might be in the wrong seat." Sarah looked at him with calm brown eyes. "Seat 11F. That's what my boarding pass says." Marcus frowned. "First class." "First class," she confirmed, her voice neutral. He made a sound in his throat, something between disbelief and annoyance, then turned away. But Sarah heard him mutter to the woman across the aisle, loud enough to be heard, "Must be using miles. Or someone else's ticket." The woman, wearing designer everything, smiled in agreement. "Standards really have dropped, haven't they?" Sarah said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that silence often spoke louder than words. The flight attendant arrived, a tall woman named Jennifer with perfect hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked at Sarah's boarding pass, then at Sarah, then back at the pass. "This is, correct?" Jennifer asked, her tone suggesting it shouldn't be. "Yes," Sarah said simply. Jennifer's smile tightened. "Well. Welcome aboard." The words were right, but the warmth behind them was reserved for the passengers who looked the part. As the plane filled, Sarah became a topic of conversation. Not loud enough for her to officially complain, but loud enough to make sure she heard. "Is that a military hoodie? Probably got it from a thrift store. I wonder how she afforded this ticket. Maybe she's someone's assistant. You know, using their miles. Whatever happened to dress codes?" Sarah pulled out a book from her backpack. Old, paperback, the spine cracked from multiple readings. She opened it to a dog-eared page and began to read. Or at least, she appeared to read. Mostly, she focused on breathing steadily and reminding herself why she was on this flight. The plane pushed back from the gate. Safety announcements played. The engines roared to life. Marcus Wellington ordered a whiskey before they even took off. "Long day," he announced to anyone listening. "Big meeting in D.C. Defense contract worth $40 million. These government types, you have to wine and dine them, you know. Show them the good life." The woman across the aisle, who had introduced herself as Patricia Van Morrison, nodded knowingly. "My husband consults for the Pentagon. The stories I could tell about how our tax dollars get wasted." "Don't get me started," Marcus agreed. "Half these military people, they're just pushing papers. Never seen real work a day in their lives." Sarah turned a page in her book. Her expression didn't change. The flight leveled off. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Jennifer and another flight attendant, a younger man named Tom, began drink service. When they reached row 11, Jennifer smiled warmly at Marcus. "Another whiskey, Mr. Wellington. Please. And some of those warm nuts if you have them." "Of course." Jennifer turned to Sarah, her smile cooling by several degrees. "Something from the bar?" "Just water, please," Sarah said. "Tap water?" "That's fine." Jennifer's eyebrow raised slightly. "We have bottled water. Sparkling, still, several brands. Tap water is perfect." "Thank you." A small smirk played at Jennifer's lips. She poured water from a plastic pitcher into a plastic cup, the kind usually reserved for economy class, and set it down without a napkin. Patricia leaned forward. "Honey," she said to Sarah, her voice dripping with false concern, "if you can't afford the drinks, you could have just stayed in economy. Nobody would have judged you." Sarah took a sip of water. "I'm fine where I am. But thank you." "It's just that," Patricia continued, "first class is really for people who understand certain standards." "I understand standards," Sarah said quietly. Her eyes met Patricia's, and something in that gaze made the older woman pause. "Probably better than you think." Marcus laughed. "Listen to that. She's got some fire. Tell me, sweetheart, what do you do?" "Let me guess, retail. Food service." Sarah closed her book carefully, marking her page. "I work for the government." This caused a ripple of barely suppressed laughter through the nearby seats. "Government," Marcus repeated. "Let me guess. DMV? Post office?" "Something like that," Sarah said. "See, that explains it," Patricia said to Jennifer, who had paused to listen. "Government salary. That's why she can't afford to dress properly." Sarah could have explained. She could have told them that the hoodie was comfortable for the long flight she had just completed. She could have mentioned that her jeans were worn because she had been traveling for 3 days straight. She could have said that her backpack contained items she couldn't risk losing in checked luggage. But she didn't. Because in about 45 minutes, they would be landing at Joint Base Andrews. And everything would change. The flight continued. The comments continued with it. "Bet she's never even been in a plane before this. Someone probably gave her that ticket as charity. Military hoodie. Probably trying to get sympathy points. Everyone knows those stolen valor people." That last comment came from a man 2 rows back, loud enough to carry. Sarah's hand tightened slightly on her water cup, but her face remained calm. Tom, the younger flight attendant, approached her during his rounds. Unlike Jennifer, his smile seemed genuine. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" he asked quietly. "I'm good, thank you." He hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "For what it's worth, I don't think there's anything wrong with your hoodie. My brother wore one just like it." "He was Navy." "Was?" Sarah asked gently. "He's out now. But he served 6 years. I'm proud of him." Sarah's expression softened. "You should be. Thank you for telling me." Tom nodded and moved on, but Sarah noticed Jennifer shooting him a disapproving look. The plane began its descent. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach to Joint Base Andrews. For those unfamiliar, this is a military installation, so you may see some additional aircraft in the area. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Marcus perked up. "Joint Base Andrews. That's where Air Force One operates from, you know. I've been here dozens of times. Very exclusive." Patricia nodded. "My husband's clearance gets us access to the VIP areas. It's really quite impressive." Sarah looked out the window. In the distance, she could see the long runways of Andrews. Home. Or as close to home as anywhere had been for the last 12 years. The plane touched down smoothly. As they taxied, Sarah noticed something that made her sit up slightly straighter. On the tarmac, off to the side of the main runway, sat two F-22 Raptors. The most advanced fighter jets in the American arsenal. They weren't supposed to be here. F-22s operated from combat air patrol stations and specific strategic bases. Seeing them at Andrews was unusual. Unless they were here for a specific reason. The plane pulled up to the gate and stopped. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Sarah didn't stand up immediately like everyone else. She waited, watching through the window. A ground crew was approaching the plane, but not the usual crew. These men wore different uniforms. Military uniforms. And they weren't alone. Marcus was already in the aisle, pulling down his expensive carry-on. Finally. I tell you, Patricia, the travel is the worst part of these trips. At least you were in first class, Patricia said, shooting a meaningful look at Sarah. Some of us know how to travel properly. The cabin door opened. Jennifer moved to greet whoever was boarding, her professional smile in place. That smile faltered immediately. A man in a military dress uniform stepped onto the plane. His chest was covered with ribbons and medals. The stars on his shoulder marked him as a general. Behind him stood four more service members, all in dress uniforms, all standing at rigid attention. The general's eyes scanned the cabin, and they stopped at row 11. At seat 11F. At Sarah. Major Chen, he said, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent cabin. Permission to approach, ma'am. Sarah stood up slowly. She reached into her backpack and pulled out something that made several passengers gasp. It was a military uniform jacket. Dark blue, pristine despite being folded. But it was what was on the jacket that made Marcus Wellington's whiskey glass slip from his hand. Wings. Not the wings of a commercial pilot. The wings of a fighter pilot. And above them, ribbons and medals that made the general's impressive display look almost modest by comparison. Sarah pulled on the jacket with practiced ease. It transformed her immediately. The tired woman in the hoodie disappeared, replaced by someone whose very presence commanded respect. Permission granted, General Hayes, she said, her voice still quiet but carrying a different quality now. Authority. Command. General Hayes stepped forward and saluted. A full, crisp military salute. Sarah returned it. Major Chen, Hayes said, I apologize for the short notice, but we have a situation. We need Viper. Viper. Her call sign. The name whispered in certain military circles. The pilot who had done things that were still classified. The aviator who had trained half the Navy's current fighter pilots. The woman who had flown missions that only a handful of people in the entire world knew about. Understood, Sarah said. Brief me. Hayes handed her a tablet. Sarah's eyes scanned the information rapidly, her expression focused and professional. The cabin was frozen. Every passenger who had made a comment, every sneer, every smirk, had turned to stone. Marcus Wellington's face had gone pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Patricia Van Morrison clutched her designer purse like a lifeline, her eyes wide with horror. Jennifer stood near the cockpit, her perfect composure shattered. Oh my God, Tom whispered to himself. That's Viper. Sarah finished reading and handed the tablet back. I need to access my gear. Is my team ready? Standing by at Hangar 7, ma'am, one of the service members behind Hayes reported. Your F-22 is fueled and ready. Good. Sarah turned to grab her backpack, then paused. She looked at Marcus Wellington, who seemed to want the floor to swallow him whole. That $40 million defense contract you mentioned, she said calmly. I'm one of the people who tests whether the equipment you're selling actually works. I'll be reviewing the bids next week. She let that sink in. Standards matter, Mr. Wellington. In equipment, and in people. Marcus made a sound like a dying animal. Sarah turned to Patricia. My salary is public record. I make about $60,000 a year. That's what the government pays someone with my rank and experience. But I've also turned down 3 offers from private contractors, each worth more than $1 million annually. Because some things matter more than money. Ma'am. Patricia's face had gone from red to white to green. Finally, Sarah looked at Jennifer. The flight attendant looked like she wanted to disappear. The water was fine, Sarah said simply. But maybe next time, treat every passenger like they matter. You never know who they might be. She moved into the aisle. The general and his team stepped aside, still at attention. As Sarah walked past, Tom suddenly snapped to attention himself, though he wasn't military. It was pure instinct, respect demanding recognition. Sarah paused and looked at him. Your brother. What was his rate? Aviation mechanic, ma'am. He worked on F divided by a -18s. Sarah's expression warmed. Good rate. The mechanics keep us alive. Tell him Viper said thank you for his service. Tom's eyes glistened. I will, ma'am. I absolutely will. Sarah nodded and continued down the aisle. But before she stepped off the plane, she turned back one more time. You know what the real difference is between first class and economy? She asked the cabin at large. About 30 inches of leg room and free drinks. That's it. It doesn't make you better than anyone else. It doesn't make you more important. It just means you paid more for a seat. Her eyes swept across the stunned passengers. I've flown in helicopters with no seats at all, with people shooting at us. Believe me, first class on a commercial flight is a luxury I never take for granted. Maybe you shouldn't either. Then she was gone, striding down the jet bridge with the confidence of someone who belonged in the sky. General Hayes paused at the door. He looked at the shell-shocked passengers. That woman, he said quietly but clearly, has saved more lives than everyone on this plane combined. She's flown missions I still can't talk about. She's trained pilots who've gone on to train more pilots. There's a reason we call her when things get serious. He straightened his uniform. And she travels in a hoodie because after a 3-day training exercise in Nevada, that's the most comfortable thing to wear on a civilian flight. She's earned that comfort. She's earned everything. He saluted the cabin crisply, though no one there deserved it, and left. The silence that followed was crushing. Marcus Wellington sat down hard in his seat. His multi-million-dollar deal suddenly felt very uncertain. Because in 1 week, someone he had mocked and dismissed would be evaluating whether his company's products were worthy of protecting American lives. Patricia Van Morrison thought about her husband's Pentagon connections. Would they matter when word got around about how she had treated Major Chen? In military circles, reputation traveled fast. Jennifer stood frozen, replaying every dismissive word, every cold smile. She had treated a decorated military officer like trash. Her supervisor was going to hear about this. There were probably already people reporting it. The other passengers sat in their expensive seats, first-class tickets in hand, feeling smaller than they ever had in economy. Through the window, they could see Sarah crossing the tarmac. The 2 F-22 pilots who had been waiting by their aircraft snapped to attention as she approached. She stopped, spoke to them for a moment, and even from a distance, you could see their faces light up. She was known to them. Respected. Maybe even legendary. One of the pilots gestured excitedly at his aircraft, like a kid showing off a new toy. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, and climbed up to look at something in the cockpit. Tom watched from the door. My brother told me about her, he said to no one in particular. He said she used to do surprise visits to the maintenance crews, thank them personally. Said she knew more about aircraft systems than half the mechanics. He said she once helped them diagnose a problem that the engineers had missed. He shook his head in wonder. He said meeting her was the highlight of his service. On the tarmac, Sarah finished her conversation with the F-22 pilots and continued toward Hangar 7. Even from a distance, her stride was purposeful, professional. This was her world. The sky. The aircraft. The mission. Inside the plane, reality settled in with uncomfortable weight. The passengers gathered their belongings slowly. The rush to deplane had evaporated. Now, people wanted to leave quietly, without drawing attention, without being associated with what had happened. As Marcus Wellington finally stood to leave, he caught sight of his reflection in the window. Expensive suit. Expensive watch. Expensive ticket. And absolutely none of it mattered. He had spent the entire flight convinced of his own importance, dismissing someone who was infinitely more important than he would ever be. Someone who protected people like him every day, without recognition, without praise, without even basic respect. The irony burned. Patricia Van Morrison gathered her designer bags, her mind already writing the story she would tell her husband. But even as she crafted it in her head, she knew the truth would come out. It always did. And in military communities, disrespecting an officer like Major Chen was social suicide. Jennifer filed past with the other crew members. The captain had already heard what happened. She could tell by the way he looked at her, disappointed and angry. Her career wasn't over, but it had definitely been damaged. The passengers deplaned in silence, a stark contrast to their earlier loud confidence. Outside, in Hangar 7, Sarah Chen was all business. She stood before her team, 6 of the best pilots in the Navy, all of them hand-picked, all of them excellent. "Here's the situation," she said, pulling up a display on the hangar's main screen. "We have an unknown aircraft entering restricted airspace over the Atlantic. It's not responding to communication. It's not showing proper identification. And it's headed toward the eastern seaboard. Could be mechanical failure," one pilot offered. "Could be," Sarah agreed. "Could also be hostile. Could be a test of our response time. Could be a lot of things. Which is why we're going up to find out." She looked at each of them in turn. "This is potentially a combat situation. Everyone clear?" "Yes, ma'am," they answered in unison. "Good. I'll take lead. Rodriguez, you're my wing. Davidson, Miller, your second element. Chang, O'Brien, your reserve and backup. We go up, we identify, we assess, and if necessary, we respond. By the book, by the rules of engagement, and nobody plays hero. Clear?" "Clear, ma'am." "Then let's move." The team dispersed to their aircraft, moving with practiced efficiency. Sarah walked to her F-22, running her hand along its side with something like affection. Her crew chief, a grizzled sergeant named Martinez, grinned up at her. "She's ready for you, Major. Full load, everything checked twice. You always take good care of me, Martinez." "That's because you always bring her back in one piece, ma'am." He hesitated. "Heard about what happened on the plane. For what it's worth, they were idiots." Sarah smiled. "Water under the bridge, Sergeant. I've got bigger things to think about." "Yes, ma'am. But still. Idiots." She climbed into the cockpit, settling into the seat that fit her better than any first-class airline seat ever could. Her hands moved across the controls automatically, checking systems, running through pre-flight with the ease of someone who had done it thousands of times. In the tower, controllers watched as 6 F-22 Raptors moved into position. "Andrews Tower, this is Viper Flight," Sarah's voice came over the radio, calm and professional. "Requesting clearance for immediate takeoff, heading 090, mission priority Alpha. Viper Flight, you are cleared for immediate takeoff. Godspeed, ma'am." The F-22 streaked down the runway, one after another, and lifted into the sky with a roar that shook windows for miles around. Inside the terminal, some of the passengers from Flight 847 heard that sound. They looked up, watching the contrail streak across the evening sky. Tom stood outside the terminal, watching. His phone was already out, texting his brother. "You won't believe who I met today. You were right about everything you said. She's amazing." On his phone, a photo he had snapped through the plane window, Sarah Chen walking across the tarmac toward her F-22, purpose in every step, belonging in every movement. The response came back quickly. "You met Viper?" "No way. What was she like?" Tom thought about how to answer. About the quiet dignity. About the professionalism. About the grace under pressure. About the lesson she had taught without even trying to teach it. Finally, he typed, "She was exactly who she was supposed to be. Even when everyone else forgot." High above the Atlantic, Viper flight approached the unknown aircraft. "I have visual," Sarah reported. "It's a civilian aircraft, Cessna citation, registration visible. Circling at 15,000 feet. Appears to be in distress. Can you raise them?" "Negative on radio." "I'm moving closer." Sarah brought her F-22 alongside the smaller aircraft, close enough to see into the cockpit. One pilot, unconscious. No co-pilot visible. The plane was flying on autopilot, but without guidance, it would eventually run out of fuel and crash. "Tower, I have a pilot down situation. Single occupant, appears unconscious. Aircraft is flyable but no one's flying it. Copy, Viper. Medical emergency transponder activated. Coast Guard helicopter en route. Can you keep eyes on until they arrive?" Affirmative. Viper flight, maintain formation. Rodriguez, stay with me. Everyone else, keep the perimeter clear. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah flew alongside the struggling Cessna, ready to respond if it deviated course or became a threat. But mostly, she was there to make sure a fellow pilot didn't die alone in the sky. When the Coast Guard helicopter arrived, Sarah guided them in, providing wind conditions and the best approach. The helicopter's crew managed to get a medic onto the Cessna, who stabilized the pilot and took control of the aircraft. "Viper, this is Coast Guard rescue. We have the situation under control. Thank you for the assist. Glad we could help. Safe flight." Sarah pulled her F-22 away, climbing back to altitude where her team waited. "Good work, everyone. Let's go home." The 6 F-22s turned back toward Andrews, flying in perfect formation against the setting sun. It had been a long day. A longer flight. And a reminder that appearances could be deceiving in every possible way. Back at base, Sarah finally pulled off her flight suit and changed into comfortable clothes. The same hoodie. The same jeans. She threw her backpack over her shoulder and headed for the parking lot. General Hayes caught up with her at her car, an old Honda with a dent in the fender. "Hell of a day, Major." "Just another day, sir." "About what happened on the flight?" Sarah held up a hand. "It's fine, General." "Really? I've dealt with worse." "I know you have. But you shouldn't have to. Not from civilians. Not from the people you protect." Sarah smiled tiredly. "They didn't know. And now they do. Maybe they learned something. Maybe they didn't. Either way, it doesn't change what we do." Hayes nodded slowly. "You know, you could make this an official complaint. There are channels. And waste time on paperwork when I could be flying." Sarah shook her head. "I'm good, sir. Besides, I think the embarrassment is punishment enough. You're a better person than I am, Major. I just have different priorities." She opened her car door. "Is there anything else, sir? I've been up for about 20 hours, and my bed is calling. Get some rest. And Major? For what it's worth, that was some fine flying today." That Cessna pilot is alive because of you. It's what we do, sir. We bring people home. Sarah drove home to her small apartment off base. It wasn't fancy. The furniture was mostly secondhand. But it was hers, and it was enough. She made a simple dinner, checked her email, and settled onto her couch with the same paperback book from the flight. Her phone buzzed. A message from Rodriguez, her wingman. "Hey Viper, saw the video." "What video?" A link appeared. Sarah clicked it reluctantly. Someone had filmed her walking off the plane, posted it online. The title read, "First Class Passengers Mock Woman in Hoodie, Had No Idea She Was a Fighter Pilot Hero." It already had 500,000 views. The comments were predictable. Some supportive. Some skeptical. Some angry at the passengers. Some questioning whether it was real. Sarah sighed and put her phone down. She hadn't wanted attention. She had never wanted attention. She just wanted to do her job, fly her missions, and maybe make a difference. But that was the thing about truth. It had a way of coming out. And when it did, it rarely stayed quiet. Over the next few days, the video went viral. News outlets picked it up. Military blogs shared it. Discussion forums debated every detail. Marcus Wellington's company suddenly found their defense contract under intense scrutiny. Not because Sarah had done anything vindictive, but because the story got out, and now everyone was watching. Patricia Van Morrison discovered that disrespecting a military officer in public had social consequences. Her husband's Pentagon connections suddenly went cold. Jennifer found herself in mandatory sensitivity training and faced a formal review of her conduct. The other passengers dealt with their own versions of embarrassment as friends and family recognized them in the video. Sarah ignored all of it. She flew her missions, trained her pilots, did her job. But she did make one small change. The next time she flew commercial, she wore her uniform. Not because she wanted recognition. Not because she wanted special treatment. But because Tom's brother had sent her a message. "My brother said you helped him feel proud of his service. You reminded him why he did it. Thank you for that. And thank you for showing everyone that heroes don't always look like what we expect." So she wore her uniform. Because maybe, somewhere on the flight, there was another young person thinking about serving. Maybe there was a veteran struggling with purpose. Maybe there was a kid who needed to see that heroes were real. And if she had to deal with extra attention and thank yous from passengers who recognized her, well, that was a small price to pay. Seat 11F became just another seat on just another flight. But for everyone who had been on that plane, who had made those comments, who had judged without knowing, Seat 11F would always be a reminder. A reminder that everyone has a story. Everyone deserves respect. And the person you dismiss today might be the person who saves your life tomorrow. Major Sarah Chen, call sign Viper, continued flying. Continued serving. Continued being exactly who she was, regardless of who was watching. Because in the end, that's what heroes do. They show up. They do the work. And they don't need first class to prove their worth. They already know what they're worth. And so does the sky. 3 months later, Sarah found herself back on a commercial flight. Same route. Same airline. Different plane. She wore her uniform this time, as she had promised herself. The moment she stepped into the cabin, she felt the shift in energy. Passengers noticed. Some nodded respectfully. Others smiled. A few thanked her for her service. The flight attendant, a kind woman named Maria, greeted her warmly. "Major Chen, we're honored to have you aboard. Can I get you anything special?" "Just water is fine," Sarah said with a smile. "Thank you." Maria brought her water in a real glass, with a napkin and a genuine smile. "My son is thinking about joining the Air Force. He wants to be a pilot like you." Sarah's expression softened. Tell him to follow his dream. We need good people in the sky. As she settled into her seat, this time in 8C, a young girl across the aisle kept staring at her. Finally, the child whispered to her mother, then gathered her courage. "Excuse me," the girl said shyly. "Are you a real pilot?" Sarah turned to her. "I am. Do you like airplanes?" The girl's eyes lit up. "I love them. I want to fly when I grow up. But my friend says girls can't be fighter pilots." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Your friend is wrong. Girls can be anything they want to be. I've flown with some of the best pilots in the world, and many of them were women." She pulled out a small notebook from her pocket and wrote something down. "Here. This is my call sign and my email. When you're older, if you still want to fly, you write to me. I'll help you figure out how." The girl took the paper like it was made of gold. "Really? Really? Promise me you'll work hard in school, especially in math and science. Can you do that?" "I promise." The girl clutched the paper to her chest, beaming. Her mother mouthed, "Thank you," to Sarah, tears in her eyes. The flight took off smoothly. Sarah looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tom, the flight attendant from that first flight. "My brother started volunteering at a youth aviation program. Says he wants to help kids see what's possible. Thank you for inspiring him to do more." Sarah smiled and typed back, "He earned that inspiration himself. Tell him I said keep up the good work." Another message came through, this one from General Hayes. "Major, your promotion to Lieutenant Colonel came through. Congratulations. You've earned it 10 times over." Sarah stared at the message. Lieutenant Colonel. More responsibility. More missions. More lives depending on her. She typed back simply, "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." As the plane cruised at altitude, Sarah thought about that day in seat 11F. About the mockery, the judgment, the assumptions. About how uncomfortable it had been, and how satisfying the truth had been. But more than that, she thought about what came after. The young people who reached out, inspired. The veterans who felt seen. The conversations about respect and dignity that rippled outward. One uncomfortable flight had sparked something bigger than she had expected. The businessman next to her, an older gentleman, finally spoke up. "Excuse me, Major. I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you the pilot from that video? The one from a few months ago?" Sarah tensed slightly. "I am." He nodded slowly. "I want you to know, I was on a flight 2 weeks ago, and I saw a young man in military uniform getting similar treatment. And I spoke up. I told them he deserved respect. I wouldn't have done that before seeing your story. You changed something in me. Thank you." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest. "That means more than you know. Thank you for standing up for him. It was the least I could do." He extended his hand. "Robert Miller. And I mean it, thank you for your service." They shook hands, and Sarah saw genuine respect in his eyes. Not because of her rank or her medals, but because he had learned something important. The plane began its descent. Sarah gathered her things, including the paperback book she still carried everywhere. As she stood to leave, several passengers nodded to her. One veteran, recognizable by his unit cap, gave her a crisp salute. She returned it with equal precision. Walking through the terminal, Sarah passed a newsstand. There, on the cover of a military magazine, was a photo of her in the cockpit of her F-22. The headline read, "Breaking Barriers, Female Fighter Pilots Leading the Next Generation." She smiled and kept walking. There was work to do. At baggage claim, she spotted a familiar face. Tom, the flight attendant who had been kind to her that day, was there with a young man in a Navy mechanic's uniform. Major Chen. Tom called out, waving. Sarah approached them. Tom gestured to his brother. Major, this is David. My brother. The one I told you about. David stood at attention immediately. Ma'am, it's an honor. I can't believe I'm actually meeting you. At ease, Sarah said with a smile. Your brother spoke highly of you. 6 years on F divided by a -18s, right? David's eyes widened. You remembered. I remember everyone who keeps our birds in the air. You did important work. Thank you, ma'am. And thank you for what you said to Tom that day. It reminded me that my service mattered. I've been feeling lost since getting out, but now I'm working with kids, teaching them about aviation. It feels right. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's exactly where we need good people like you. Those kids are lucky to have you. The brothers thanked her again before leaving, both walking a little taller. Sarah's phone rang. It was Martinez, her crew chief. Major, we've got a situation. There's a hurricane forming off the coast. They're asking for volunteer pilots to fly weather reconnaissance. It's going to be rough. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'm in. When do we leave? 6 hours. I'll have your bird ready. I know you will, Martinez. See you soon. She hung up and headed for the exit. There was just enough time to go home, grab her gear, and get back to base. As she walked through the automatic doors into the cool evening air, Sarah thought about the journey. From that uncomfortable flight in seat 11F to this moment, everything had led somewhere meaningful. She had faced judgment and disrespect, yes. But she had also inspired change. She had reminded people to look beyond appearances. She had shown a young girl that dreams were possible. She had helped a veteran find purpose again. And tomorrow, she would fly into a hurricane to gather data that would save lives. That was the real story. Not the viral video. Not the revenge or vindication. But the quiet, steady work of making a difference, one flight at a time. Sarah climbed into her old Honda, tossed her backpack in the passenger seat, and started the engine. The sky was turning orange and pink with sunset. Somewhere up there, above the clouds, was where she belonged. And in 6 hours, she would be there again. Doing what she was born to do. Flying. Serving. Being exactly who she was meant to be. Because heroes don't need recognition. They don't need first-class seats or special treatment. They don't need people to know their call signs or their missions. They just need the sky, the mission, and the knowledge that what they do matters. Major Sarah Chen, soon to be Lieutenant Colonel, call sign Viper, drove toward home with the sunset in her rearview mirror and the stars beginning to appear overhead. Somewhere out there, an F-22 waited for her. And the sky, as always, was calling her home.